Yeah.
Hey, hello everybody. Good evening. Welcome to East City Bookshop. Thank you for being here tonight with us. My name is Marianne. I'm the store manager here. And I want to thank you for coming out to welcome Robin Peguero for a discussion of his new political thriller, One in the Chamber. Joining him in conversation is Farai Chideya. Can we give them a warm welcome for being here? Is this anybody's first time here? Several people. Amazing. Thank you so much for coming. Who's been here before? A bunch of people. Well, it is great to have you all here and also our Zoom audience. Thank you so much for tuning in. Before we get started and I introduce our authors, some quick housekeeping notes. If you would take a moment to silence your cell phones, it'd be appreciated. Tonight, if you need a restroom, they're located upstairs right past the cash register. More importantly, if you need to purchase a book tonight, Robin and Fry's books are at the register right upstairs. And they'll be having discussion, after which we'll have a Q&A. If you're here in person, you can just raise your hand to ask a question. We will repeat the questions back for those on Zoom. If you are on Zoom, you can put any questions you might have into the Q&A box, and we will answer those as well. After the Q&A, we'll have an in-person signing, so stick around. Now, I would like to introduce tonight's author, Robin Peguero. Robin spent 7 years storytelling to juries for a living, most recently as a homicide prosecutor in Miami. An Afro-Latino and the son of immigrants, he graduated from Harvard College and Harvard Law School. He has written for the Miami Herald, the Harvard Crimson, and the Harvard Law Review, and he served as a press spokesman in the U.S. House, a speechwriter in the U.S. Senate before becoming a lawyer, and an investigative counsel on the House Select Committee investigating the January 6th attack on the U.S. Capitol. He was recently chief of staff to a member of Congress and is currently teaching in Miami. Joining Robin in conversation is Farai Chideya. Farai is a journalist who created Our Body Politic, which was a nationally syndicated public radio show, podcast, and insights brand centering Black women and all women of color. The podcast produced the documentary January 6th, An American Story, about BIPOC investigators on the January 6th committee. She's the author of 6 books, the most recent of which is The Episodic Career, How to Thrive at Work in the Age of Disruption. Chideya has covered every presidential election from 1996 on, worked for 538, CNN, ABC, and NPR, and appeared on numerous other networks. Born and raised in Baltimore, Maryland, she graduated from Harvard University and lives in Brooklyn, New York, and Washington, D.C. Please join me again in giving a warm welcome to Robin and Farai.
Thank you so much. I love a great bookstore, and this is a great bookstore. I've already added to my, stash of little compressed trees with words on them today. I found something about 3 guys who go. I'll have to give it its due. No One Dies Yet, and it's basically about the year of return from of African Americans to Ghana, and it's got a murder plot in it. So I was like, okay, I'm sucked in. This is the kind of bookstore where I can find something that really speaks to where we are as a culture and all of the cross-cultural natures of what we experience and also what we want in our fiction, which brings me directly to One in the Chamber, which has, you really remix it here with race, with national origin, with sexuality, and the different ways that people perceive this era where, I grew up where there were 2 genders, and I have evolved into understanding a different experience of gender, but you have people who debate these things in this book. And I think that there's so much culture in this book. I expected it to be political, and it's certainly political, but it really deals with identity. And so how did you decide to put this cast of characters on a page?
Yeah, so it's a pleasure to see everybody here. A lot of friendly faces in the crowd. It's great to see you all. And thank you, Farai, for doing this. I am very appreciative. Um, in terms of developing the characters, I worked for a total of 6 years on the Hill. The first four, right out of college as a 21-year-old kid. It was Charlie Rangel gave me my first shot, I like to say, my first job out of college. And then the past 2.5 years here in DC. And I like to say that this is my sort of gruesome love letter to DC, right? It's about a murder. And there's certainly, junior staffers plotting together to murder a senator. I certainly had no designs on ever doing that. And so I have in the acknowledgements, but certainly my latest boss, calming him, reassuring him that he is not one of the horrible bosses that is being depicted in these books, because he was genuinely smart, sweet, and kind boss to have. Um, but through those 6 years, I really started to see sort of archetypes of people who are on the Hill. And sort of my first book, what I really want to do is I want to entertain as much as possible, but I also want to reveal something, maybe about a system that is well known, but people don't get too much of an inside peek at, right? And so the first book was about murder trials, and how people think of them as, based on objective fact, when so much of it is a performance, so much of it actually deals with people's prejudices, their worldviews before they even enter the courtroom. And that's what ultimately leads to a verdict. And in this case, what I wanted to do was pull back the veil a little bit on Capitol Hill, a place, as I said, where I cut my political teeth, where I came into being when my first, as I said, job right out of school. And I started to see, again, these characters, these people. There's a rich culture here, for better or for worse, right? There's a lot of ambition, there's a lot of drive, there's a lot of people looking to connect. It's a transient city, and so people are friendly. People want to make friends. And in the book, we have our main character who's trying to ingratiate himself with this group of affluent staffers, right? And then there's a lot not to like about the culture. There's a lot of staffers being underpaid, overworked. There are big egos at the top, working for elected officials. I like to say you sort of.
Some big egos in the middle.
Yeah, no, right, all the way down, right? From staff assistant on up, there's eagles everywhere, right? Um, but yeah, and so I think I wanted to reveal some of that. I wanted to, and so those characters that I developed was based on the people I saw, the people who helped me along the way, certainly, the people who make up this great culture that is both, it can be toxic and really uplifting and great. So I wanted that balance.
I will give away nothing by saying that you really land the plane in the book with making clear all these different connections between the characters. But maybe you could tell us about one or two or three of the characters. What are the kinds of characters you created for One in the Chamber?
Yeah, so we have Randy, who's kind of like a nepo baby, right? The senator's nephew, who's kind of on his fourth tour of being an intern, right? We a lot of the clique, the junior clique that Cam, who comes from humble beginnings, is trying to ingratiate himself with, are people who are affluent, right? That's a common story on the Hill. You sort of need to have, and certainly back when I was working on the Hill, independent wealth, really, to be able to afford a place on your own in DC. Internships were unpaid at the time. Thankfully, now most are paid, but even then, it's certainly not sufficient. And so you get these folks who are really close to power, right? Capitol Hill is run by 21, 22-year-olds, right? Who are taking the calls, who are responding to the letters, who are advising the members, certainly in the House, a lot more direct contact with youngsters in their first few jobs right out of school, and as someone in a position of power. And so Randy's kind of that prototypical, rich kid, who's kind of coasting, who, his is Uncle Senator, not very proud of him, because he's coasting and not working hard. But he develops, I think, a really strong friendship with Cam. Um, who else do we got? We got Chewy, who is Hispanic staffer, a non-binary character who Cam comes to really appreciate and respect their pronoun choices, because Cam, again, is trying to sort of fit in with this group. And he, as you read, he sort of is a little bit of a blank slate. That's one thing that he says, that people like about him, is that they can sort of project themselves onto him and see whatever it is they want to see in him. If it's one thing people like talking about or seeing is a reflection of themselves, right? And so Cams thinks that that's like a really valuable tool he has, and Chewie's part of that, right? He is somebody who is potentially um, uh, not super progressive, sort of like a traditional nondescript character, who really extends sort of an olive branch to Chewie, who's undergoing, some difficult times given sort of his identity and how people perceive them. Um, so that's a couple of characters.
Yeah, well, we don't have to keep going down character lane one by one, which is the position that I kind of put you in. But it's really like, in some ways, this book reminds me of a Western movie where it's like, something's happening in this town, and this gunslinger comes in, and this gunslinger comes in. And so you assemble this group, and you don't really know whether they're good guys or bad guys. And that's something that I thought was interesting, that kind of sustained, the tension in the book, is that, you're like, what is the motivation of this character, and how are they going to act as they proceed through these various misadventures? And then you have a lot of I would say judgmental assessment of what socializing on the Hill was. So we'll get back to the serious stuff in a second, but I'm sure that you must have had some less slippery and slimy social interactions than the ones in this book. I mean, like, there's a lot of basically people trying to stab each other in the back while stabbing in the back, drinking in the front. you know, a social life with a lot of peril.
Mm-hmm. Well, I hope I'm forgiving of them and the characters. I don't want it to be so much of a scathing indictment of the people who work on the Hill. I think really good, smart, capable, hardworking people. I met some of my best friends here in DC, and with people who worked alongside me on the Hill. The culture is toxic, not the people, and so I hope that that comes across. That there's a genuine love and affection for this place. I wouldn't have spent more than 6 years of my life dedicated to working here if I didn't see real positives, even in the sort of slimy interactions, right? We're all human beings. And you mentioned, you can't really decipher who's a good guy and who's a bad guy. Spoiler alert, they're all bad. Whenever I write, I like to write unlikable characters, and it's unfortunate. Maybe it's a sort of dim view I have of humanity, that everybody's kind of, fallen from grace, and we're trying to work our way up back to that perfection that we'll never reach. But I love reading characters who are flawed. I see myself in them. I see my loved ones in them, people I care for so much. We all have those flaws. And so I'm happy to have, characters who I think are true to life. And in terms of, their motivations being kind of opaque, I really appreciate that. There's the murder mystery from the start, a senator is dead, and you kind of have a feeling that it's, a murder that someone has intentionally by their hand put forth that result. And so I didn't want people to be wondering if they're going to get a payout at the end, right? Sometimes you read murder mysteries and then it's like, oh, the death is, natural causes or some accident, and it didn't really uh give you the ending that you were hoping for. But it's clear from the beginning, no, there's a murder, there's a dead senator. What I wanted the mystery to be was really why. Why
Yeah.
would somebody go to this length, right? It's such a exaggerated view of political violence, right? We couldn't probably ever imagine it to a staffer plotting to kill their boss. But I started the process of writing this as a satire, as an exaggeration, because I think, the normalization of political violence in our culture, and how I wanted to shine a light on it by exaggerating it, right? By making it entertaining, by making it sort of over the top. And through the process of writing, and at the same time that I was on the January 6th committee investigating, the first on peaceful transfer of power in our country, and seeing, sort of ludicrous ideas, right? Plot to assassinate the governor of Michigan, a person breaking into the house of Paul Pelosi to threaten him and try to find the speaker with a hammer. I think it started to become less exaggeration, and it felt more like life was imitating art in that respect.
Yeah. I mean, definitely there are things that are seem very on the nose. Like there's a key, not a character in this drama, but a character in what people are talking about who is very much like a certain Florida governor.
Yeah.
Down to the job.
Right.
And you write such great interstices where you are like dipping into news coverage or right-wing radio. Like there's a whole scene in a gun range where you are like there's a reading of what was on the radio at the time. How does it feel to write sections like that where you're trying to like talk about how close we have gotten to political satire? It's the great tragicomedy of American political life.
Yeah, no, I think a lot of what happens in the book is reflective of real life. I think someone asked me, so there's a confirmation hearing for a Supreme Court justice and whether it's patterned after Justice Kavanaugh. But I say it could be just as much patterned after Justice Thomas. Unfortunately, we've come to
Yeah,
a
I
point
thought of Thomas.
where these sorts of things are become, you know, commonplace. Have kind of repeated their cycles, unfortunately, of women coming forward with credible allegations that ultimately don't matter. That ultimately do not result in the denial of something that is a privilege, you know, a lifetime appointment to the Supreme Court. Right? It certainly isn't the loss of liberty. It isn't the loss of money. Even it's just the loss of something to which no one is entitled, and us as, you know, the people have the right, I think, to demand certain standards for the people who are going to be making those sorts of decisions for the country. So yeah, you know, I as you mentioned, you know, there are facsimiles, I think, here of, you know, the Florida governor, of potentially maybe Vice President Harris. The book is
Yes.
set in 2024, and I was off the mark in the sense that I was thinking, okay, it'll be the Florida governor versus the vice president, which is not reflective of our real life, but I like that. So this is like a little bit of like an alternative universe,
Yes.
where
Yep.
the
We're
former
in the
guy is
metaverse.
finally out of our lives. But no, he's still here. But in the book, you won't find him, which is great. So, you know, it could be a little bit of an escapism in that way. He isn't looming large in the narrative. But yeah, I think when you're doing satire, the expectation, you're holding sort of real life to what you see out there, right? Again, it's exaggerated, but you want it to feel based in this earth. You want it to
Yeah.
feel relatable. You want it to feel as though it could take place on Earth One, as they say sometimes in science fiction media. And so, yeah, I think that hopefully that's a treat for people who are reading through it and recognizing the people who I may be sort of pillaring in these pages.
Yeah. I mean, I got so much out of watching you assemble this cast of characters and the complexities of how they treated each other. Like there were characters who I was like, Randy, I don't like you. I just don't like you, Randy. But now you got me. Now you got me on your side. You know, like you were able to bring out the best and the worst. Not that everyone was the worst. There were a lot of characters who were sympathetic, but I also enjoy writing when I do fiction, characters who are not always sympathetic. But what did you, how do you, I'm trying to think of how to form this sentence. How do you journey through your characters? Like when you're writing them and each of them is different in one way or the other, do you sort of act them out? Do you write down little notes about them? How do you produce them?
Yeah, so I'm not a big guy in terms of like writing a 30 to 40, 50-page outline before I start writing. There are folks who do that. And for me, I have a little notebook where I scribble down ideas. I have a general idea of where I'm starting and then an idea of where I'm going to end up. But I really don't have delineated the process by which I get there. And I think for me, the joy of writing is not knowing necessarily how the journey is going to go. I want to sort of experience the story the way that a reader might, and have it come naturally, and build upon itself, as opposed to being, you know, stale and dedicated and regimented to whatever plan I had formed, a year later, because sometimes it takes about a year, given my other responsibilities to write a novel. So yeah, I'll have like again sketches, archetypes of people, of characters, and then I let them kind of speak to me. I let them sort of take a life on their own and kind of lead me where they should go. And that's a really fun process for me, and hopefully yields good results. But that's how I go about it.
Yeah. What kind of looking glass are we looking into for 2024 in your book? Just describe a little bit more of the reality. There's a lot of similarities, but what might be the differences between 2024 in One in the Chamber and 2024 here in this world?
Yeah, I mean, I think democracy is sort of on the line. I don't
Yeah.
think I say that without feeling too exaggerated, right? There's always been in this country, two major political parties on, you can disagree, but we sort of had a baseline understanding. I got into politics really interested as a 15-year-old in Florida. My parents, I knew we were Democrats. I knew we were supporting Vice President Gore, but I wasn't really paying attention. I didn't know why. And when I came home to watch on the news those 32, 33 days that the election was up in the air, and it was happening right in my backyard there in Miami. I just remember I would watch the news for hours, just really gripped by that drama. And then the pinnacle was, the Supreme Court decided in Bush v. Gore that the recount would be stopped, and essentially handing the election to George W. Bush. And there was that great moment where Vice President Al Gore conceded, right? And people were telling him, you should go out there and say this is wrong, that this is a political choice. It's a 5-4 vote, like it's entirely a partisan decision. And he said, no, what's good for the country, this is it. This is the Supreme Court. They've spoken. This is the law of the land. And I should concede now. And I've always had a real big thing for political losers, I like to say.
Yeah.
So I remember reading in history books about Adlai Stevenson and all the campaigns he mounted and lost. And then, I was a big fan of Hillary Clinton, obviously lost in dramatic fashion in 2016. And I just think that that's the most beautiful like side of politics, right? You have, when President Obama won, and that was a beautiful moment, but I kind of feel more inspired and more in love with this democracy when I see someone who loses and loses graciously, and realizes that their personal ambition, as much as they have them, obviously as elected officials, comes second to the interest of the country. And so what's different is that in this novel, people are talking about how this Trump light is maybe smarter than the previous president. So there are all these dangerous things that person can accomplish more so than someone who's maybe a little bit more dim-witted and not that savvy, certainly with the way that the levers of government work. But in real life, we have, I think, again, a candidate who in the days after January 6th was, most people had sort of divorced themselves from, had sort of distanced themselves from, and we've worked our way backwards since then. So that again, he's sort of the mainstream, and I think that's that certainly with a book that's again about murder, the real timeline, Earth One, I think is a little bit in a more precarious situation, a more scary situation than even what takes place in the book.
Oh, definitely. As just a random point of fact, I was there at the exact moment when Hill staffers stormed the recount in Florida in the Bush Gore election. I was there doing some reporting, and one of the things that stood out to me was that there were not that many. I mean, people didn't know they were Hill staffers at the time, but also there were not that many of them, and the cameras were shooting them in such extreme close-ups that it looked like a massive riot, but it just wasn't. And so there's so much in your book about making reality, that the job of the Hill staffers and other people is to make reality. You do a lot with tonality of like, how people inflect their voices or what kinds of looks they give each other, because there's this art in politics to selling someone. So are you selling your sadness? Are you selling your honesty? And there's so many times where people are either genuinely selling an emotion or kind of acting in a way. Um, what what should we take away from the fact that politics has such heightened emotion and that we're constantly reading, but we may or may not be reading it right,
Yeah, I mean,
both in the book and in real life?
yeah, I think so much of it, as you put, is a performance. I certainly, when it comes to life and death matters, when I was a prosecutor, that also is a performance. It is telling a story. I used to tell my attorneys, when they were crafting their opening and their closing statements, that you are telling a story, you're telling a narrative. Thankfully, as prosecutors, you're doing what you believe to be the truth, what you believe to have happened beyond a reasonable doubt. But you've got to have a beginning, a middle, and an end. You've got to have a plot. You've got to have something at the beginning that sort of draws your audience. You're putting on a show, right? At every moment, right? When you're objecting, when you're speaking to counsel, the jury is looking to you, and they're looking to see how you're reacting, whether they can trust you, whether you're an authoritative figure or not. I mean, all of that ultimately comes into the decision as to a verdict. And I think politics is the same way. It is a performance. That doesn't mean that there aren't, as you put it, genuine emotions behind it, that there aren't good public servants who are trying to do good through government. I really do believe that. I am not cynical about that. And I've had, great bosses. One of them is here. Just, I'm happy to see, but who I consider to be a very awesome public servant, who cares about results and cares again about good government and doing good for the people. But even really good public servants need to think about that. They need to think about their public persona and how they're communicating to constituents, right? Messaging is important. That performative aspect is there. And I think people, in the end, I think they need to be less bowled over by those sorts of things, right? Charisma and, who you want to have a beer with and who comes across telegenically over the screen. Ultimately, people should be voting their interests. They should be voting just, who will make your life better, who's looking out for the majority of people, not just your life maybe, but how you might end up one day, right? You might be in the lower income tax bracket at some point, right? You need to have that sort of empathy and think about society at large, and not focus maybe so much on that performative aspect. I think it's important, but I think as voters, we need to make sure that we see past that, and actually think about the facts, the policy behind it.
Yeah. And yet, of course, if you can't always get elected if you can't perform.
Right.
Yeah. Well, I want to open this up to questions from the audience. We have a robust audience here. Go, Robin. And love to get you. And we also may have some people on Zoom. So does anyone have a question? A question for Robin? Okay. If you want, you can use the microphone. Otherwise, I'll have to repeat your question.
I'll try to project. Thank you so much for writing this, and I'm sure for the folks who have or currently work on the Hill, a lot will resonate. As you were writing this, presumably while you were either working in this same workplace or coming off of it, coming back onto it, how did you manage the emotions that maybe came up for you? Especially knowing sort of the role that you had with the investigative committee and looking at just sort of that exact conversation of being in some of the darkest moments of democracy and then writing about it in a way that can still captivate people. How did you navigate that?
Yeah. Yeah. We just, for the people on Zoom, I'll just repeat, how did you navigate your emotions, especially while dealing with things like the January 6th investigation?
Yeah, this was sort of my escape, I think. Again, it's kind of dark. Again, I'm writing about staffers plotting to murder their bosses. So that's not a particularly sunny outlook on the world. But I think it was, as I mentioned, an escape for me. We were speaking to folks at times who could be combative, who were attempting to revise history and their role in history, who were looking to downplay their role in either, the lead ups. My team, the blue team, we were looking at the intelligence community's preparation for January 6th, and then the actual response on the day of by police and by the National Guard. And there's a lot of talk about how over the summer and the social justice protests, the response was very different, right? It was far swifter, it was far more draconian, and then there was a little bit of reticence to go there during the insurrection on January 6th, and whether that was, as a function of their race, that they looked different, that they looked more like the some of the officers who their own family members were reciting some of the things that they were listening on Fox News about the election being stolen, and about there being widespread fraud sufficient enough to change the outcome of the election. And so there was a sort of a difference in response. And I think one thing that the January 6th committee did well is that they tried to hire investigators who were from a broad cross section of the community, a very diverse set of staffers. And so when you're dealing with that sort of the sort of drama on a day-to-day basis, there are emotions that come up. I think thankfully for me, I had done 7 years of always being, dealing with people at their lowest moments. Being a homicide prosecutor is a pretty it can make you pretty pessimistic. It can feel a little thankless, right? Everyone is sort of not happy to see you. The judge, let's say, is yelling at you and is ornery and upset. Certainly the defendants potentially unhappy with me, the defendant's family, and then even the victims who ostensibly, we have our interests aligned. They're not my client, but often our interests are aligned, are unhappy with me for not pursuing this amount of years or whatever it is, or being constrained and bound by the law in ways that they think sound improper. So at any given day, you're dealing with all these dramatic stories, these moments in people's lives, and no one is happy to be there. And so I think that was maybe a training ground for my ability to compartmentalize, what happened in January 6th and stay motivated to keep up with the work. And I think, as I said, writing is such a joy for me that it really, no matter the dark subject, it really was kind of a break for me, an escape, as I mentioned. So thankfully, there weren't negative feelings in writing this. There was just a lot of love, a lot of affection for this place, as I mentioned. Hopefully the Barbs are in good humor. As you mentioned, hopefully people resonate with them, because we all commiserate with it. We all, and that was, I think, the last thing I'll say is really important to me when I became, senior staff, was to remember how it felt to be a junior staffer, and to try to really care about staffers' professional development and their emotions and their feelings and whether they were happy. And so I think certainly during my time in Congressman Ivey's office, I that was sort of a joy to sort of be in real time, to know that I'm writing something about the despairs of working on the Hill, and that I could hopefully be helpful on the margins to some folks in navigating what can be difficult place to work.
Fantastic. Anyone else? Okay.
Great to see you, Robin.
Good to see you too.
In your last novel as well, where you're in court proceedings, it can be kind of a complex space, and similarly, Senate, really complex. So how do you navigate trying to balance, like, not getting bogged down in the weeds, explaining every little thing, but also not writing it in a way that's so inside a baseball that it would only really be understood by all staffers?
So I'm just going to repeat that for the folks on Zoom. How do you nail your descriptions so that you are not too inside baseball and not too over explaining?
Yeah, that's a big concern for me. I'm always very worried about that. I don't want to come off certainly pedantic. Ultimately, this is meant to entertain. It's meant to be fun. It's meant for anybody who maybe doesn't have experience or knowledge or even cares about the Hill to still find it gripping and to resonate with parts of it. And I think I still want to say something hopefully smart about the place that I'm sort of exposing. And you know, I'm a lawyer, so I think I probably I'm worried about leaning too much on sort of jargon, on the sort of machinations of like. Thankfully, I don't know so much about parliamentary procedure, so like that part, and I'm sure my colleague Barry will email me to let me know that's completely off and wrong. I look forward to that. But so yeah, I can't be too smart about it because I I had never really even learned the bells. You know, when I was chief of staff, I was like, I don't. There are votes happening, but I have no idea why they're ringing in this order, and now it's the red light. So but you know, I guess I have editors for that to tell me like no one knows what this is. Get rid of this. And in fact, a lot of some of their edits were like, do we need this whole confirmation battle? It's like a lot about that process.
I love that.
Yeah, I stuck with it. I told her like, no, we're gonna stick with that. And again, because I think I want to say something. It's not just about the murder, right? It's not just about the sexy parts of the book. It's about also giving people a peek into that performance, into how you know, those hearings, not the January 6th committee hearings, thankfully, but the traditional hearing is just, there's a lot of noise, right? There's two sides, uh you know, saying completely different things, having different sets of facts, and in the end, a viewer sometimes doesn't know what they're supposed to take away from it. And I kind of wanted that sense of frustration that we all feel in those hearings, that you feel like potentially we didn't actually move the ball any farther. If anything, maybe we took two steps back, that to come through in the novel. So hopefully I did a fair job at depicting that.
Yeah, there's a lot of really great use of gender and reproductive justice in your book. So I you know, I have like this galley copy which I read because this is the you know, this is the first copy that I got, of course. Got it for work. But I made a running list of all these different things. And very often I was struck by ways that you, like, you have an absolutely devastating scene near the end of the book about an encounter between a pro-life protester or an anti-abortion protester and someone going to get an abortion. I won't say anything more than that, but I thought that was really well written.
Thank you. Appreciate it.
Okay. Any more questions? Do we have anything on Zoom? No. Okay. Yes. Hey, how are you?
Great writers, often great readers. Did any novel or writer inform this book or your writing generally? And are you reading anything good yourself right now?
So what writers influenced you, and are you reading anything?
Right now I'm reading The Darkest Hours of Midnight, which is by Ashley Winstead. And I'm getting through that. Someone who I had the pleasure of sitting on a stage with, presenting both our novels, and she's great. She does both work in romance and in thrillers, so I'm really I look up to her for having that ability to sort of transcend genres, which is really nice. In terms of influences on me, you know, some folks, I had a radio interview earlier this week, and someone mentioned parallels to The Secret History by Donna Tartt, which I did read, and I really loved. And that sort of, you know, it sort of follows that same pattern, right? It's a group of students, and that novel, and they're building towards sort of a crescendo, kind of the same way that this book does too. So that, I'm sure, was an influence on me. And then in terms of just growing up, I big authors for me are Gabriel Garcia Marquez, and so I try. He, you know, he's very flowery, and I think that almost certainly influenced all my types of writing. My college professors, people who read my legal briefs, I'm sure will tell you that so there's a story in the first book of one of the characters that was true, that someone in the one of my TAs told me, she wrote this on my paper, your writing is too melodramatic for the government department. And so one thing I tell my students now, because I teach legal writing at the University of Miami, is your voice is your voice, and writing is very subjective. So when I give you my feedback, take what you like and leave what you don't. And if you feel strongly about something, keep doing what you're doing. A lot of times people told me to draw it back, to write differently. I do for different audiences, naturally. But I think it's still my voice. I think when people read my writing, whether it's in fiction or it's a legal brief, I'm still trying to attract attention. I'm trying to keep the reader engaged. It's still a narrative. It's still a story. It needs a beginning, middle, end, and a plot. And so that, that's very important to me. Yeah. Now I already forgot what the original question was because of my tangent.
No, that wasn't a tangent. It's like, he was saying great writers
Yes.
are great readers, but then what are you reading now?
Yeah. So actually, Winston is who I'm reading now, and then I think now I know. Remember, I was talking about Gabriel Garcia Marquez, and then the other person I'll say, but very like high school literature, but William Faulkner. And I think for me, I really like, maybe to a fault, I've received this criticism before. I like for people to work at it. I don't like I like when I'm reading something to not exactly maybe know where I'm at. And William Faulkner is big for stream of consciousness, so it's a little hard to follow. But when it all comes together like a puzzle, it feels really nice. You feel like you worked for it and you earned something. You earned yourself a treat at the end. And I'm hopeful that my sort of endings are a little bit of a treat. I try to make it subvert expectations and make it surprising for folks who have gone through the journey. And I see writing or reading as a little bit of a journey. And so I think William Faulkner is probably an influence in that respect.
Yeah, I love Faulkner. Any other questions? Well, we could wrap up. Anyone on Zoom? No questions. Well, I'll ask you a couple more questions. I mean, when you think about the characters that you put together in the little gang that forms in this book, what do you think they found or didn't find in politics? Because in some ways it seems like they're so agonized by what it takes to be a political staffer. But do you think any of them got what they were looking for?
Yeah, probably not. And I think early on there's a discussion about you can come to DC and remake yourself. You can be a completely new person, which is a line to pay attention to. But I think it also is reflective of people maybe coming here to find themselves, especially as I mentioned, right out of college. You're trying to find purpose. Often, for me, out of school, a lot of my colleagues, the first go around in college, were doing finances and consulting, and they, making good money. And I came here to work for peanuts. And then it happened again after law school, where most of my colleagues are going to big firm jobs. And I went to go be a prosecutor and actually took a $12,500 pay cut from before law school, what I was making on the Hill, after incurring all this debt from law school. So I think for a lot of folks, they're looking for something else. They're looking for some sort of fulfillment in their jobs that is past compensation, at least monetary compensation. People come here, I think, with really, really good intentions. People who believe in government, who believe in public service, and then oftentimes, unfortunately, become jaded by the process, by the culture here. And so I think that's what these characters are looking for. They're looking for finding some sort of resolution, some sort of closure. Some of them have these motivations that we find out by the end that are dark, that they're trying to resolve, trying to gain closure for those past hurts and past traumas. And no, I don't think anyone really gets it in the end. But I think that's also maybe true to life if you're trying to find sort of a panacea, a cure-all for whatever it is sort of missing in your life, in your heart, right? Certainly overworking your way through it is not, that's not going to lead you, I don't think, to greater peace. And so you got to realize that this is a job just like any other job. And I used to tell my staffers the same thing, like do what's best for you. Don't stay extra time because you feel like I don't want to disappoint my chief of staff or my member. They're I used to tell them, although I consider them my friends, I was like, but they're not your friends. They're your bosses. And so naturally, do what's best for you, see it as a job, compartmentalize it, and don't expect to get what you're missing from it. It can be fulfilling, it can be great work, but it is still work, and you need to see it that way.
And so my last question to you is, who are you becoming? You are an author multiple times over. You are someone who knows the law and who knows government. Who are you in the process of becoming?
That is a
And
loaded question.
and professor.
Um, I think I have all these diverse interests, and I think I'm trying to settle. I think is what I'm trying to do. I'm trying to become a more well-rounded person. I think for me, I guess I derive a lot of joy and a lot of fulfillment from being busy, from sort of working as much as possible on academics or my profession. And what I would like, what I think I'm hopefully becoming is somebody who make sure that all parts of my life are things where I'm putting in the time and the work. Right. So I don't have a 9 to 5 job for the first time ever. And that's a little scary, to leave what was a perfectly great job in search for a little bit more of that flexibility to practice and work through all these different interests so that I can hopefully sort of narrow it down to a more select number. And so that it's been a joy. It's scary, but it's been a joy the past 2 months to be able to do that. And I think that's my goal. My goal is to settle down, plant some roots, and really just hopefully keep learning, keep growing, and doing good for this world, hopefully.
Amen to that. Thank you so much,
Thank you so
Robin.
much. I appreciate it.
Thank you so much, everyone, for being here. We are going to switch over to a signing in just a moment. So we'll take a moment, reset. If you feel like helping us out, you can fold up your chairs and just put them to the side, and we'll set up the signing line right here. And before we do that, how about one more round of applause for our speakers tonight? And if you still need the book, right upstairs at the cash register. Thank you all. We'll be right back.
Thank you. Oh, yeah, let's do that. Absolutely. Yeah, let me move my